We should introduce each other like wrestlers. And on the other side of the screen, the one and only Abby Cameron. I feel like you're playing your walking music should just be me beatboxing badly.
Oh, well, okay. My walking
Your walking music. Like,
can I have one of those silk robes? Like purple.
Oh, you have to
like
have one of those.
Deep purple indigo colored silk robe.
And you're like air punching and stuff with like the hood down over your eyes.
But can I have a shirt on underneath that?
No, it has to be over the robe. It's just sticking out like the sleeves and underneath. With like your hood all caught in the collar.
That wouldn't look awkward at all.
I would do it. I would come out wearing that, and then I would box in all of that getup. I wouldn't take any of it off for the match.
Oh my gosh!
I would love to see me in a cage fight.
It'd be like your superhero cape, like kind of floating out underneath your shirt. It's like the lower half of your cape blowing in the wind. I don't know.
Yes, and like the long sleeves are like coming out from my t-shirt sleeves.
Yeah,
and
right. And then you're like bouncing off the ropes, and like every time you like go and you launch off the rope, the cape like whoosh,
flies in the wind.
Yeah.
And then I like ignore the person I'm in the ring with. I just keep on like revving up the crowd
and you're,
like the whole time.
Yeah. And you're, like,
there is no fight. There's like not even anybody else in the ring. It's just me running around, just be like, yeah, bouncing around, being a leaf in the wind. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's going to be our first True North live event, is what we just described. You ready to do this? I'm ready to do this.
I'm ready to do this.
What? Why is what? Where?
Oh,
are you looking at your actual room, or is this like an energetic thing? Ladies and gentlemen, Abby's like looking up, and she's like, room. Why is that there? Oh. I don't know if like Sarah was showing you something.
Oh, she's been showing me a lot lately.
Is she ever not showing you stuff?
That's a really good point. I guess it's whether or not I'm choosing to pay attention.
Welcome to the True North podcast, where two practicing light workers get together every week to continue an ongoing conversation about wholeness and healing for body and mind so that you can live as your true self and follow your true north. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Abby! That's going to make no sense if you don't play that other part.
Oh, yeah. No, we're playing all of it. We're already like 15 minutes into this. Or however long we've been doing it.
3 minutes and 18 seconds.
3 minutes. That's the perfect amount of time. Mm-hmm. That's what... Mm-hmm. Okay, so what do you got?
Oh my gosh, we have so much to bring to the table today.
We sure do.
Okay, so I see things in... Not see things as in like physically see, but things sort of unfold in my life in patterns of 3. And typically when the third thing has happened, it's sort of an indication to me to pay attention. This is either something I need or this is something my tribe needs. And, you know, I've been trying to come out of this haze of loss from the last year, and I still feel like I'm still kind of in it. And so, and then with, you know, the inauguration this week and the new president coming in, and just, I feel like there's just more divide again, the us versus them sort of happening, that I feel like this is a topic we really need to talk about. But this thing happened in 3s. I've had 3 people individually have a conversation with me, with us, over this particular topic. And it's about using your own voice and speaking your own truth. And so I thought, okay, today's the day to really talk about this, because I feel like, especially where we are after kind of recent events in our country's history, that this would be a good time to talk about what that means and how to do that, why it's important, what happens when you don't, that kind of thing. So
yes,
that's what I'm bringing to the table today.
Okay, so you just want to jump in?
Yeah, but I first need to make a disclaimer a little bit, because I am speaking on a topic today that is an issue for me as well. In fact, way back a little over a year ago when I sat down with you, and the reason why I even brought let's do a podcast together to the table with you is because I went to see Tony, and my voice has been squashed my whole life. First by force, and then probably by choice, because it's a learned behavior right now. Now it's by choice, but it is a learned behavior. It's a survival behavior for me. So it's something that I constantly work on, but it does manifest into physical issues for me. So in seeing Tony about some of those kind of physical problems I was having, one thing that he said is that I'm not using my voice and it's becoming detrimental and I need to start doing something about it. And so he was recommending all these things that you can do to start using your voice. The first thing he said was start a podcast.
Check.
Because if you start a podcast, you have to have something to talk about. You know, you're going to start talking about things that matter to you, things that are your point of view, your reference, your voice. So I thought about that. I'm like, well, that's way too scary to do by myself. Who could I do that with? Who'd want to do it with me? And I'm like, Ryan, because we have the best conversations. Yeah. So
yes.
That's a long-winded explanation to say that I'm talking about this today, but also know that like I am in this position with many people right now. This is still an ongoing, very mindful practice for me, right? So I put that out there because this is a hard topic. This is something that's really hard for people to do. And I just want everyone to understand that I get that. It's incredibly difficult for me. And I still fight with it because I'll go round and round many times after we've done a recording, like not getting myself to not tell you to delete something or let's re-record, or I fight that constant battle because I've used my voice and it scares the shit out of me and it's now going to offend somebody. So I want to talk about that too. But, so I guess the first thing is I just wanted to kind of lay it out there and give our audience like our perspective on what it means to, what does that exactly mean to use your voice, to speak your truth? Because I think we first need to kind of define what that is. So do you want to give your thoughts on that? I'll be quiet for a moment.
So my first thought is I was there for one of the conversations you're mentioning,
yes.
One of the three. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was interesting how you've been using your voice for more than a year on this podcast. Mm-hmm. And yet still, it's almost like your body is still saying, hey, use your voice. Mm-hmm. And so that reminds me of a quote from Rumi that came across my radar a little while ago where he said, raise your words, not your voice. It is rain that grows flowers, not thunder. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing about that is the people I know who actually put into practice the concept of raising their words, being impeccable with their language, actually speak very little. Mm-hmm. Because they understand that it's how easy it is to be wasteful with words and to use your voice and still say nothing. Mm-hmm. And so maybe it's like what I'm seeing in your journey is you just warming up to using your voice was just getting through the door. Like you were told, use your voice because you're not using your voice. But now you've been using your voice. And maybe the next step is to not just raise your voice, but raise your words. And what does that look like? Which is a weird thing for someone like me to say to someone like you, because I experience you as one of the people who speaks seldomly because you want to make sure that when you do, there's immense value packed into your words. And I feel like the antithesis to that.
Okay. Yeah, right. I don't say any much unless I feel it's something that needs to be said, which you can certainly see that on our podcast sometimes. There's definitely an imbalance of how much I speak versus how much you speak. But and that's a good point that you make. Like using your voice and speaking your truth is not talking more. Mm-hmm. It's simply saying the things that are more in line with your values and more authentic to who you really are, but saying them in a way that stays in your business and isn't, how do I want to say it? Like you're speaking your mind, you're speaking your truth in a way that is true to your own personal experience. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to say that it won't trigger somebody else because that's their business and that's on them. We never know whether or not we're going to trigger the other person or not. But by saying words, however few they are, just that those words are really in line with who we are, that we're expressing our essential selves in the things that we speak. And
Yes.
that comes from a place of, like, the intention should be when you speak your truth and you're using your voice, the intention should be love and light. And so that was kind of another clear difference I wanted to make too. It's like when you do start to use your voice, it isn't about like entitlement or that I'm better than you kind of attitude. It's not judgment on somebody else. It literally is speaking your words from a place deep within you that aligns with love and light. And however the person on the other end receiving those words takes that is on them, but your intention is love and light, but it's true to who you are. Does that make sense?
That makes so much sense. And I want to float this by you because what I hear you saying is like a few, like, I think I said this on the podcast. I don't know if it was on a call or something, but I was talking about when I was a gymnast, when I was starting out, there was a list of skills I needed to learn. But then as I moved up in the levels, I realized that the skills I had learned were just primers for the next set of skills. Mm-hmm. So, you're on one side of the gym as a newbie and you're looking at the other side where all the pros are doing all kinds of flips and stuff. And you think like, well, I'm going to get there. But by the time you get there, it doesn't feel like there is even a place, Mm-hmm. And so what I'm seeing is that there are different stages of growth to go from like not using your voice to using it the way you're describing. And as a I don't know if this is true. There's all those like things those parable type stories that float around the internet that start with a college professor and then a thing happened. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know if this is true or not, but it was a story of an art teacher, of an art professor in I think a sculpture class was the way I read it. But at the beginning of the semester, he divided the class into two different groups. One would be graded on quality and one would be graded on quantity. And so the quantity ones, your grade was how much stuff could you produce, and the quality ones was how good was the thing. And the quality ones only had to do one beautiful, perfect masterpiece by the end of the semester. And so then they go throughout the semester, and by the end of the time when they're being graded, none of the quality people had anything to show for it because they were slaving over what would or might or could be perfect. But then the ones who were involved in the quantity, they had some badass shit because they made a bunch of mistakes and they did trial and error and they got their hands dirty and they figured it out, right? And so it's kind of this parable that's like, when you haven't done a thing, quantity actually is better than quality. Because if you haven't done it and you go straight to the quality thing, you're going to be perfectionist about it. One of my godkids is as early as I have seen her being called upon to perform a thing, she would go into her head and refuse to do it unless it was perfect. Like, I think she's one of those kids whose first words was the first sentence. You know?
Yeah.
And so if it's not going to be perfect, I'm not going to do it. And that's neither right or wrong. And some people are there because they've arrived there through the quantity, and some people start there, right? And so I guess the picture I'm trying to paint is like, if you don't use your voice, if you're just not in the habit of using your voice, you have reasons for not using your voice. And so at that stage, it's less about deciding to use your voice as it is about grappling with those reasons. And sometimes using your voice in quantity is a conduit through which you can interface with those reasons and parse out if some of them are worth keeping or if some of them are worth shedding, right? Like if you've used your voice with somebody and it has consistently caused them to reopen your emotional wounds or harm you in some way, emotionally, psychologically, physically, whatever, then you have a really good reason for not using your voice around them. But if they don't have a track record of doing that, but someone else 2 decades ago did, and you're not using your voice with this person because of what happened then, and they haven't even had a chance to show you how they would respond, well, then that's a thing that you would want to grapple with, right? So sometimes the act of using your voice can help you grapple with the reasons why you haven't before. Not that they're all bad, not that they're all things you have to overcome, but you can just ask yourself, like, what are my reasons, and are those still reasons that serve me today? Even if they did serve me when they were formed, because they probably did. And then after using your voice and kind of putting yourself through that ringer, I see it becoming a lot more easy to arrive at the place where you're more impeccable with your words, you're more selective with your words, not out of fear of what might happen to you, but because you've just kind of learned how to wield the tool of communication through experience of using it. How does that land on you?
Well, I like your story about the quality versus quantity, because it brings to mind the phrase practice makes progress. Like, we're so used to saying practice makes perfect, but really what you're saying is practice makes progress. It's like you need all those, and fail really stands for first attempt in learning, right? It's not really a failure. It's just your first attempt in learning. And each time that you quote unquote fail, you have learned a new and different and most likely progressive way to do something better, to do something different. And so I like that you say that, because it kind of talks about something that we've mentioned in the past, where it's a link in a chain. You know, every time you're doing something, it's like that small step. It's that micro movement. You're making one step to do it better the next day. But there's also something else you said that I think is really important to point out when we're talking about using your voice, and it's about that safety piece, because there is a big difference between setting a boundary and using your voice. Not using your voice with a person that could hurt you physically, emotionally, spiritually in some way is setting a boundary.
Yes.
That is not you being a weak person. That's not you not being able to speak your truth or stand up for yourself. That sometimes literally just means you are setting a boundary because you have enough worth and care about yourself to know that's what you need. And so you went in there with what you were saying, just about how if that person is not safe, that is not the person to use your voice with. That is certainly not the person to practice with, you know, if you're not yet at that masterpiece level. So, you know, as we're kind of flowing through this conversation today, I think that's an important thing to take away. Like, we are asking you to practice. I want to kind of talk about some ways you can do that, but just be very mindful that it needs to be with safe people until you've learned how to show up that way and protect yourself one day in a situation with somebody that may not be considered as safe.
Right. And then if you do have to set a boundary with someone who has proven to be not safe for you, the habit of setting and keeping boundaries is a good thing to keep around, but the boundaries themselves, I'm learning to allow myself to grow out of them. Like, there was a time in my life that I was that having certain one, like, fill in the blank boundary served me. But then if I move into a setting or a relationship with something else, then I don't need to necessarily drag that boundary along with me. You know, it served me when it came up, and there's nothing right or wrong about that. It was just a tool that I used and it helped. But then if you find that it's kind of like the trope of you're not on your first marriage, but you bring your issues from the first marriage into the next one. Right? So you're not really talking to your current spouse. You're just rehashing the unresolved stuff from your previous one. And so there's an element of constantly evaluating, does this boundary still serve me, or is it a vestigial thing from another time when it did? And sometimes the answer is yes. But it's just a matter of asking yourself that question instead of just assuming that it's a yes or no.
I mean, a boundary is not necessarily a blanket boundary across your whole entire life, right? I
think but we make it that way if we're not careful.
If we're not mindful about it. And this is, I mean, I'm glad you brought this up, because the example that you were talking about from our tribe call the other night was this particular tribe member has a family member, her brother, that they disagree on politics. And you know, so she was questioning whether or not she should kind of speak her truth in that situation about politics, or hold her tongue, right? And so then that's when I started to make the difference. Well, are you really just holding your tongue, like not speaking your truth? Or are you setting a boundary? Because, and that's a very clear distinction to make, because in that case, it's a family member. She very much loves her brother. They probably meet each other where they are, but the conversation around that particular topic of politics is not going to go anywhere productive. And so the boundary in that case is, we agree to disagree, so let's just not talk about politics. But it isn't hurting either one of them, because that was the first question, right? It's not hurting either one of them have those conversations. They're just not productive and not going anywhere. So that's a boundary to have with that particular person, which she may then not have with somebody else.
Right.
Because they're either more in line with her thinking, or less argumentative, or whatever reasons may be there. But you're right. Boundaries serve you for the time being, but it's something to constantly sort of. And this is why I really love reflection a lot, which I know we will eventually get into that component. But like when you are
January
reflecting,
2022.
like, yeah, using your example of like going from one marriage to the next and sort of rehashing your past marriage in the current one, reflection helps you do that before you even get to the new marriage, right? I think it's an important piece.
And while you're in the new marriage, you can always parse out, like, is this you or is this the other person?
Yeah, exactly. And you're just, it's just constantly, but that to me, that's the progress piece that you're talking, or the quality, the quantity piece that you're talking
Quantity
about,
over quality, yeah.
is when you're constantly checking in. It's like, that's that quantity, you're doing a self-check on how you're showing up in all of your different experiences. So what does, I want to ask you this. How do you, like, what would you tell listeners to start using their own voice?
What would I tell them to use?
Yeah, or
voice?
like how? I'm just curious.
Well, I think the first thing is noticing when and where and how you already use it first.
So, again, reflection, because you need to know where you are.
Right. That's going to be the underlying habit behind just about everything we recommend ever. It's just start by noticing.
Knowing where you are.
Right? Because then you're going to catch yourself wanting to say something and choosing not to. Or you're going to catch yourself having said something without even realizing that you're running your mouth. That's me a lot. A lot of times I don't realize what I've said until I've said it, if I'm not choosing to actively be present. Right? And so you have to observe your relationship with your voice as you currently use it, to give yourself a baseline, a starting point to know where you are. Right? And then if you want to use your voice and choose not to, figure out why. And maybe you know why. Maybe this isn't stuff you have to figure out, but still have the conversation with yourself anyway, because bringing it into some type of material form like words or thoughts or journal entries or something gives you something tangible to work with. All right? So then why am I not using my voice when I think of something to say and then don't say it? Is it safety? Is it habit? Is it pattern? Is it whatever? And there's no judgment there. There's no shoulds. There's just the answer to the question. And then for me, when I want to say something, what I do is I stop and say, like, do I really need to say this? Like, is this really going to add any value to anyone at all? And if you notice, one of the things I do when I'm listening, and this is something I started doing intentionally, and now I don't really think about it anymore, I just catch myself doing it, is I'll put my hand over my mouth like this. Like when I'm actually, when someone's talking and I feel like I really need to listen and not interrupt them, not talk, not think in my head about what I'm going to say when they're done talking, I'll physically close my mouth with my finger and telling myself, shh. And that's like my body telling my mouth, no.
Just listen. Just be here.
Just listen. Right? Not that the thoughts I have are not important, but if I engage with those while you're talking, then I'm not engaging with what you're saying. And that's a habit that I built out of observing that's what I do, that I'm so eager to use my voice. And because I'm a straight white male, I just was raised in a world saying, hey, you should use your voice. Everybody wants to hear what you have to say. Everything you have to say has value. And I would operate from that place of entitlement and privilege without even realizing it. And then when I realized it, I was like, oh, well, I should listen.
And I'm over here saying, that's easy for you to say.
Right. Just noticing that's what society says. It says, hey, Ryan, use your voice. Everybody loves it and wants to hear it, and it's valuable, and more valuable than the person you just interrupted. Fuck that. You got to be mindful of it. Why do I talk so much? Why do you not talk so much? Ask yourself why. Observe what you're doing. Ask why, and then start there. And I don't even have anything else to prescribe past that, because the course will chart itself.
Yeah. Well, you bring up an important point, is why do we fear using our voice in the first place. And I can tell you from my experience, the reason why I don't is because, number one, I don't like conflict. I don't, and typically really all conflict is one or both parties are triggered. And so we're just projecting those hurt feelings
Right.
onto the other person, and the other person's owning it. But nonetheless, that's sort of old pattern wiring in me that's just how I show up sometimes. And then, there's also fear of losing the relationship, fear of hurting somebody else, fear of even exposing ourselves up to someone else hurting us. And we're not prepared to do that. I think we also don't use our own voice sometimes because Brene Brown calls this bullshitting, where all of a sudden, this is, okay, a perfect example of this is I'm bringing this topic up again, I know, but on vaccines, because I feel like I have a considerable amount of knowledge, but there's still a lot of stuff that I don't know. And it is one of those really risky topics to kind of just discuss with people, especially if they're not really willing to listen to your story, to your side. So when I do get brave enough to kind of speak my truth and share my experience, what happens then is they'll throw something back on me because I've triggered something in them. Maybe they're angry. And so then I'll get defensive. And then it's easy for me to roll into bullshitting mode where I just start spewing crap that's probably not true because I've already put it out there. And
you have to defend it.
And it feels really awkward for me to say, that's a really good point. I don't know. Because then I feel like I look stupid. Like I've just told you something, but now I'm retracting and be like, well, I guess I don't really know. And then I feel like I'm completely discredited. So that's kind of one of those big reasons as well why we fear kind of opening it up, because it's like we have an idea of something, we sort of have an opinion of something, but maybe we haven't given enough time or thought to really answer that when people start to probe, right? So then it's just much easier not to say anything, because then nobody will probe me and then I won't hurt their feelings, look stupid, whatever.
Wow. So if there's a moment where a topic has come up that you have stuff to say on, what I'm hearing you say is that in your brain, you play out that scenario and then say, well, to curb the risk of that happening, I probably just won't say anything.
Right. Yes. Like politics is one of those things for me. I am not interested in politics. No interest. It takes everything in my being just to kind of keep a check on what's going on in our world, because I do feel that's important. But I don't know enough about it to have a really good conversation. And I find that people that like politics know a lot about it. And so anytime I say something, I immediately open this door to giving the impression that I might know a lot about it. And I don't. And I don't know how to actually speak my truth and say, this is just kind of what I think by the little information that I've been able to gather. That may not be right, but it's just kind of how I feel right now. Maybe you could tell me more. That would be using my voice. But instead, I just choose not to say anything, right? Because it feels really vulnerable to just come back and say, I don't know a whole lot on this topic. It's just, something I've been thinking after what I saw the other day.
Right. And it takes a lot of relational equity for you to be willing to be that vulnerable with somebody.
Yes.
And rightfully so.
Right. And not every person that's kind of safe.
Right.
So.
You talk to me about politics and vaccines on a podcast.
Yeah, right. I know. See, yeah, exactly. Because sometimes I feel like nobody's listening. So, but I also know that you are not. Not that I feel like they're not listening. I should say that I forget they're listening. I'm just sitting here talking to you.
Right. They're not in the room. Yeah, I get it.
I no longer remember that this is being recorded and put out.
Then I'm doing it right.
The world. Yeah. But also, you are that safe person for me, where I feel like I could say something, and if you don't agree with it or you don't believe it, you'll either probe and ask me questions so that you understand my thinking, or you'll come back and you'll tell me how I feel, but not in a way that's aggressive or makes me feel defensive. So I guess that is a perfect example of where I do feel like I am more comfortable using my voice with you, which is probably why this podcast works as well as it does.
Well, I'm honored.
Yeah.
I do want to talk about triggering, though. Because one of the things that came up in that conversation on the Patreon call was whether or not the potential reactions in other people should govern whether or not you use your voice. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we've already said that if somebody's not safe and you have a track record of using your voice and getting hurt for it, it's reasonable to choose in the future not to use your voice with that person. Then you could go back in time to earlier podcasts that we've released and just say that you're being in their business. And we usually paint that as a undesirable place to be. Mm-hmm. And so there is one camp, one school of thought that's like, respectfully, don't give a shit. If you get triggered, that's your problem. Mm-hmm. But then there's this other school of thought that's like, is it really living in love and light to not give a shit whether or not somebody else is troubled by what you say? Mm. And those two seem to live in tension with each other. And maybe they do, and maybe that tension is okay. Maybe they don't need to be reconciled. One of the things that I've stumbled upon while kind of like, circling this is that there's new trauma and there's old trauma. Mm-hmm. When we say triggered, usually what we mean is there's an old trauma that exists within me, mm-hmm. and it's not that you dug it up, it's that my experience of you dug it up.
Yes.
So you speak your truth, which has nothing to do with me. Mm-hmm. You speak it in my direction, and it goes into my ears, and then my ears tell my brain what you said. But by the time my brain has an idea of what you said, it has gone through so many filters, mm-hmm. loaded with so many past experiences and assumptions and biases, mm-hmm. so that I don't really even really truly hear what you said if I'm not fully intent on being present with you, which takes work and effort, right?
Right.
So then if I'm triggered, I'm not really triggered by what you said. I'm triggered by what somebody else said decades ago that you reminded me of. Because that's old trauma. Mm-hmm. That's not in your control. That's not your responsibility to manage. Mm-hmm. But if you are trying to be your highest self, you do place the responsibility on yourself not to cause me new trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because we don't want to do that for anybody.
Correct.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And here's where we kind of straddle that divide is if you know that the person you're talking to has a very specific type of set of triggers. You know their story. You know how they were traumatized in the past. You know what things trigger that in them. You know what's going to send them into fight or flight. You know what their amygdala is going to flag. Mm-hmm. Then whether or not you honor that is a choice you make. And I'm not here to tell you it's the right one or the wrong one, but whatever you do, you are choosing to do. Maya Angelou said, once you know better, you do better. So if I know your triggers, and I want to speak a truth that I have a good reason to assume is going to trigger you based on your old trauma, I get to then choose how I go about communicating that to you. Mm-hmm. And as somebody who has affinity for you and cares about your experience, there is a way to navigate expressing that truth while also coupling it with whatever I think I need to do linguistically to make sure that it lands still as safety on you. Whether that's a build-up or burying the lead a little bit, or honoring that you've had your experience and I realize that what I'm going to say may be triggering and I don't mean it that way. Whatever you have to do to kind of like grease the gears. Mm-hmm. And so there is something to be said for like, I'm not speaking my truth, but I am taking into consideration your experience of me and the things that I know about you that might feed into that. And I'm choosing what I give you in a way that maximizes the odds within my control, within my power, that you won't be triggered by what I say because I care about you. That's a really long sentence.
It is, and I understand what you're saying, but I have two things to say to respond to that. And the first one is though that you don't want to craft your voice though to not trigger the other person that you know so well. I think you still need to speak your voice, but by doing it in love and light is coming in with the awareness that if they are triggered, because we don't know for sure, that's their business, but if they do end up kind of getting defensive or come back and being triggered and they're projecting some things on you, then that love and light piece comes back into what we started talking about a few episodes ago, which is questioning, just starting to question and starting to like peel those layers away to figure out why they're coming back at you like that. So then when the conversation is over, that has been diffused in the other person, but you've still spoken your truth. So I think if you try to craft what you're saying before you even say it, then you're still not even really speaking your truth. I think speaking your truth is speaking it from your own way, in your own words, with that love and light intention that you will then stick with this conversation until the other person understands, is hearing what you say, and is diffused what triggered them. Does that make sense?
Yes. I do feel like you could build some of that diffusion into the initial delivery without sacrificing using your own truth, though.
You could, but I think I think that's just in how you communicate. I think that's just communicating in love and light. It's not necessarily like changing the way you say it for the fact of it's like, and now I think we're probably just arguing over semantics, right? But it's like if you're showing up that way already, you're showing up in love and light. How it's going to come out in your own true words is naturally going to have the intention of it not being hurtful.
Right. Yeah, and like you said, it goes back to the intention. Like sometimes you're going to say something that you know is just going to not land well on them and it needs to be said. And I'll use my toddler as an example because I had a moment where he was playing with this sand Play-Doh stuff. It's not the kinetic sand because that stuff's wonderful and beautiful and I love it to death, but it's this other kind of like similar thing but it gets everywhere and it leaves a residue and it's crumbly and it gets on the carpet. And so we wanted to keep it on the coffee table, and he of course is a 3-year-old. So he wasn't like, he knew that we wanted him to and he was trying his best, but it just got on the carpet. And at one point I was like, if it gets on the carpet again, or the rug, I said, if it gets on the rug again, we're going to put it away. He said, okay. And 30 minutes go by and he's playing, he's got it all where it needs to be. And then some gets on the rug on accident and he looks at it and he looks at me. And I was like, okay, well, it's time to put it away. And he really reacted aversely to this. And at one point I knew that it was an accident. I knew that he'd been careful. I knew that he really loved playing with this stuff. But we had an agreement, and in that moment I felt it was best to honor that agreement. And so I didn't let up on we're going to put it away. It wasn't even like, okay, you get one more chance. Like in this moment I just was like, okay, this is going to get put up. And he was resisting and he was bargaining and he was, just not a fan. And while we were cleaning it up, I was talking to him like, I can see that you're really upset about this. Do you need a hug? He said, yes. So I hugged him. And then after we cleaned it all up, we have those calm down toys that I mentioned. I said, okay, so do you need to take some breaths and maybe I can get you some calm down toys to help you process how you're feeling? And he said, yes. And so I go and I get the calm down toys and he takes his breaths and then he plays with his calm down toys. And I looked back on that and I was kind of like, man, if I could parent like this all the time. Like we agreed on the boundary. It was broken. There was a consequence. I followed through on it, but was still attentive to his interior landscape, still tending to his emotions, still honoring that he was having the experience that he was having and that it was a valid thing. And not even telling him don't be mad, or not like forcing my will on him, or none of this like authoritarian stuff. It was just like, I knew that what I was doing was the cause of his, well, not the cause of his suffering. He was the cause of his suffering, but I was definitely the catalyst. And I knew that. I was creating a circumstance that I knew was going to disrupt him. And then in the midst of him being disruptive, I was still able to move in compassion and help him process it and move towards his own healing. And I think there's a way to do that. I think there's a way to speak your truth, even if you know that truth is going to trigger the other person, while also continuing to be there with them and continuing to honor their experience.
Yes. Sorry, I was going down a different rabbit hole in my mind.
Where were you going?
Well, I'm going to push back a little bit. I would, nope, I'm not going to do that. Nope. Okay, I'm going to come back and stay with talking about using our voice. So, like, what happens then when you don't use your voice? Because this is why I've heard this conversation so many times, is because people have found themselves in this place that is kind of gross, right? And they're trying to use their voice. Like, the point in using your voice is when you live in that place, you're living from a place of authenticity. You are living in your true north. You are coming at it to people with love and light by meeting them where they are, recognizing what you're saying might trigger them, and not, like you said, not giving them new trauma. That's not using your voice, but recognizing that things might come up from old trauma. And but when we don't do that, then what happens is we sort of get stuck in this place where life is sort of just stagnant. Like, we're just kind of going through the motions. For many people, it could even like having that feeling of walking on eggshells, when you're in relationships, especially the ones that feel a little less safe. It can lead to other different types of health issues, anxiety, depression symptoms, like me, issues with my thyroid, because that's my fifth chakra, which is all about speaking your truth. And, so it's interesting because it then has to become this balance. It sort of makes me think of that dark wolf versus the light wolf, right? It's like if you're not, like, there's this fear of using your voice for all the reasons we just described. But then in not using it, you sort of feel like this static, right, in your body, this sort of just uneasiness, like you're constantly in limbo because you're just never in this place of feeling like you're growing or moving. You're not sitting in your authenticity. So, I'm just putting it out there that this is why, if you don't want to be unhappy, if you want to live from a place of, like as I say in my coaching, if you want to live your rich, abundant, and wild life, that requires one of the foundational principles of living your raw life is speaking your truth and staying and standing in your authenticity. And if not, it's not so much fun. Anyway.
I'm digesting that.
Yeah. Why you do that? There's this kind of funny story I want to share. When I first started coaching school, and I got on my first call with Martha Beck, and I really got over like the stargazing I was doing, like, oh my gosh, Martha Beck's on a call. The first thing she said about coaching is, she goes, this is what it's like. You have an interaction with a friend, and you don't say things back to them, but then you go home and to your spouse or to another friend that knows this friend, and you're having coffee and you're talking about, well, here's their problem. This is what's wrong with them. This is, if they could just do this, blah, 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 blah. She goes, that's coaching. You just do it to the first person. And I'm like, oh shit, I can't do that. I'm in the wrong. I can't do that. I can't just say what I think when someone presents to me their information, their experiences, what's going on with them. And it's funny that all these years later, it's like, that's my coaching model. You come to me, you present an issue, a problem that you're having, and I am then in turn basically feeding that information back to you and saying, this is what you're telling me. This is what I'm hearing you say. And it's like I'm telling you all the things that I would be telling somebody else about my experience with you, right? But because it's coaching, I'm like brave enough to do it. And so then it dawned on me as I was thinking about this conversation about using your voice. I'm like, oh yes, like this is how we need to show up with everybody. And it just goes back to, just questioning, like using your voice is just as much about questioning the other person and what they're saying and trying to understand where they're coming from and shifting your perspective to see another person as a soul going through life lessons. And those lessons may or may not align with you or with the lessons that you're trying to learn. And, so I just always found it funny. Like she just always said, coaching is telling the people the stuff that you would just really share with somebody else, but instead you're sharing it with them. I'm like, oh, okay, interesting.
That is such a fascinating way of thinking about it. It makes a lot of sense. Do you find, is your coaching business, do you have a pretty steady, even flow of clientele, or does it come in waves?
It comes in waves. And what's really interesting, what's happening right now is I'm getting a lot of returning clients that are coming back for like, I call them check-ins. You know, it's like they just kind of need that touch point on the tools that they've learned and just kind of reminders of the evidence that they have and that kind of thing. That's what's happening now, which doesn't, you would think that might be a first of year thing, but it's not. This is, it's sort of interesting right now.
Have you noticed a correlation between your thyroid acting up and whether or not you're getting a lot of coaching clients? Because that's another area in which I hear you using your voice.
I very much use my voice in coaching. It's interesting. And this goes to a point that I wanted to make about using your voice is in that practice piece, because the more you practice, the more confidence you have. And so I have confidence in my coaching because that's where I practice using my voice the most. And
I can see that.
But here's the cool thing about this. It's like when you do start to use your voice, and that's the point in me in telling you the story about what Martha Beck said, is when you start to use your voice, you will be surprised and amazed at how that information can be helpful and useful to the other person. When you do it in a way that keeps them and you're holding them in their highest good as well. Because that's what coaching is. I'm not judging you. I'm not giving you advice. I'm not shaming you. I'm simply holding up the mirror for you to get you to see your best self and why it is that you're getting in your way. And sometimes those things are hard to say to people. But in saying them, holding them in their highest good, then they actually see them and then they're willing to do the work to make the change. And that's really what using your voice is all about. It's like, I'm feeling these things. This is my experience of you. This is what I feel that you are saying and presenting to me. And I just want to mirror that back to you, right? And from my heart, this is the reason why, or this is how I feel about it. And I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah.
So you know what's interesting? We talked a little bit about the throat chakra.
That's what you asked me.
We don't have ear chakras.
No, we don't.
Because using your voice has a there's another side of that coin, which is hearing other people. And the one that sits just below the throat chakra is the heart chakra. And we equate that with healing. We equate it with love. But really, it's the one that manages give and take. It's the one that has openings on your front and your back.
Yeah.
And so if we look at communication through the lens of the chakra system, your throat chakra governs how you put things out into the world. But your heart chakra governs how you take things in. And so it's almost like when you listen with your ears, it goes straight to your brain where all the ego is. When you listen with your heart, you're hearing them. You're really hearing them.
Right. That's a soul to soul conversation.
Yes. And that is a crucial component in, like, if you have somebody in your life who doesn't use their voice. First of all, I would advise just meeting them where they are instead of trying to get them to a place where they do. That's their own journey. Well, while we're sitting here trying to get people to use their voice. But one of the ways that you can be safer for someone to use their voice is to listen with your heart instead of your ears. And what that looks like pragmatically for me is when I catch myself thinking about what they're saying, I stop. I legit just stop. When you're watching a movie, well, not you. When I watch a movie, I put myself in the position of the characters I most relate to. Right? And then I start rooting for them, and I start feeling what they're feeling, and that's why I'll cry in a movie when one thing happens that's sad with a character that I relate to, but I'm indifferent when something sad happens to a character that I don't. Right? Like, you embody their experience, and that's very much a heart chakra thing. So when someone's relating to you, what if you interfaced with their words like a movie of with a character that you relate to? Embody the experience, honor it, try to see it through the perspective of the person who's speaking and connect with them as a human. Don't mull it over in your head. Don't think about how it compares to all of your intellectual frameworks through which you process what things mean to you. If you're thinking about it, mulling it over, considering it, pondering it, running your analysis, just turn all that off and listen with your heart.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that's the best thing you can do to be a walking invitation for people to use their voice.
Mm-hmm. You're right. And that made me think about something that you said that I think we need to address as well, because I think there's also room, we're talking about people being unsafe. I think there is a point too where assertiveness has to come into play, right? And I think that falls into dealing with people that are not as safe for you. Like if you find yourself in a marriage where you feel like you're walking on eggshells all the time, and not using your voice, then that stays status quo. Like that's just sort of the normal. But then where is that going to get you? Right? You're just going to constantly be in this state of walking on eggshells. And so there is a time and a place where bravery and courage has to come into play to have that assertiveness to kind of stand up for yourself. And I think that's a different conversation than what we're having today. But I know that might be a question that comes up, for people that are listening to this. And we can certainly have that conversation. But I guess then what I'm saying is, this is sort of that foundational work. This is that quantity work, is start in those places that are safe until you can build that confidence. So when you have to come to a position where it's conflict and you need to be assertive to stand up for yourself, then you'll have all this backing you. You'll have all this experience backing you. So my suggestions for starting to use your voice is just to start really simple. Like this is, for me, this is the place that I kind of recommend to my clients when they're wanting to kind of make movement towards self-expression. It's start with your material things. So start with your house, start with your home. That's your safe place, right? You choose who comes into your home. So you can start, like if you are highly religious, maybe you start shifting your space to, having more religious artifacts around your house. Like me, what that looks like for me is I'm a lot more spiritual. I do believe in crystals. I meditate. I have tarot cards. And for a long time, I couldn't tell people that. And I still struggle telling a stranger that I think is going to be weirded out by it, by the woo-woo, that I have tarot cards, right? So for me to start getting more comfortable with that is I first started with my altar, one space that only I ever came into, that my spouse came into because she knows that part of me and she's a safe person. Yeah, exactly. You're pointing behind you. And then when I got comfortable with that, then I started moving things out into other parts of my house. So I now have crystals kind of all throughout the house. I have cards down in my laundry room. I have just small things that are starting to resonate more with my authentic self. Like this is who I truly am. And then what happens when you do that is you invite your people over. So for example, I had a gathering of some girlfriends that came over to do a vision board class a while ago, and they see those things that represent me, that are authentic to me. They're true expressions of myself that I don't normally talk about. And all of a sudden they start asking questions. And then I'm able to use my voice because they've just noticed something and they started to probe. So that opened it up for me. So that's one place to start, is just start by self-expression through the things in your home that are true to you. And then after that, then you move on to the kind of, once you get comfortable with expressing yourself through your things, then move on to your inner tribe of people. Like you are my inner tribe of person. The person that you are married to is most likely your inner tribe person. You want them to be your inner tribe person.
In an ideal world.
Yeah, your best friend. Maybe some of your family members if you're incredibly close to them. But those people that are in your inner circle where you can be vulnerable and you can try on things that you know might trigger them. Try on things that you know, like this tribe member whose brother thinks differently than she does politically, but she can still try things on to sort of get that practice, right? Because it's her brother and they love each other and they can at least get to a point maybe where they can just agree to disagree, but they're not going to lose the relationship because they don't agree on something. That's starting with working with your inner circle. It's like practicing walking through that conflict to diffuse whatever it is that's being kind of brought up and triggered. Then again, that's that quantity. It's that failing. It's that first attempt in learning, doing it over and over and over with your inner circle people. And then once you get that confidence, that's when you can step outside a little bit with all those people behind you, that experience behind you, and then start with a stranger or somebody who's more on the periphery, an acquaintance where, maybe it's somebody at work and they're kind of saying something all the time to you, or maybe it's gossip. Like I had this for me at work once where this person gossiped all the time and just was so negative and ugly towards other people. And it bothered me, but I didn't say anything for years because I didn't want to offend them, right? I didn't want them to no longer work with me or choose to work with me or whatever. And so that would be an example of like getting this confidence by doing all this quantity with your inner circle. So then I could go to that person who was more on the periphery for me to then say, I really don't like engaging in these conversations. And then kind of go from there and having the vulnerability to know that that person can either drop me or choose to work through me with it, or just, choose to still work with me, just not gossip with me anymore, and that's their business. Right. And I have to just get to a point where I'm in control of what I can control. And it's that I'm standing up for my value, which is I don't want to talk negatively about people. So that's how kind of you start. It's like you just start really small. Start with yourself by expressing through your things. Then you start with your inner tribe people. And then you kind of work your way out from there. And it really is this balance between fear and authenticity. Like there's still going to be fear there. Like telling this person I don't want him to gossip around me anymore. There was a lot of fear there. But for me to stay authentic, I had to stay in my own business. I had to have all that evidence behind me that when I do speak my truth, it is helpful either to me or to someone else. I am aligning with love and light. And then I have to get very strong and clear on what my values are. Because ultimately, if it doesn't match my values, then why am I so scared of losing this person in the first place? Just to save face. Like that seems like it's hurtful to me. It's like I'm self-sabotaging if I'm doing that. If I'm just keeping this relationship that doesn't align with my values just to save face, right? So,
but there is a gift in there because you just asked the question why. Why am I afraid of losing this person if I know that they are not my highest good? They don't align with my values. Because if you wake up the next day and you don't do something about that, then you're choosing to stay in a relationship with that person. So there's a part of you that is buying into the idea that I need to stay with this, keep this person in my life, right? And so asking yourself why, again, you can't cast judgment on the answer. Right. But if that's where you are, there's a good reason. And know your reason for why you're afraid to not have this person in your life, why you're averse. I don't like the word afraid. I like the word averse because I feel less judged when I use it. But why are you averse to cutting it off with this person? What reasons do you have? Because you obviously have some if you haven't just walked away. And there's more of you that believes that those reasons are valid than there are of you that doesn't. And so just knowing that, ask yourself why, and just know that that's where you are.
A perfect example of that, I was talking to another tribe member today, and she's in this place where she is expressing her truth a little bit more, and it did mean losing a relationship. And she was kind of spinning out about it, and then I was probing. I was asking her why. I go through the 5 whys and just kind of trying to figure it out, and it dawned on me, it's not about the person, but what she lost when she lost this person was a community that met her needs in some way. So ultimately, it's like we got to this place where it wasn't fear of losing this person. It's that also meant having some of her important needs and values met to her. Well, great. That's easy to fix. Let's find you a new community. I mean, those are challenging things. It does require some work and being vulnerable with a new group of people. But now we know it's not like this person necessarily. It's like we finally pulled back the layers to figure out why. And it's like, oh, okay, I just didn't want to leave. I didn't want to lose this group that I get these things from that I need in order to stay human.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And that's, yes, there's always going to be a thing behind the thing, another reason that has nothing to do with the person, about why you're keeping that person in your life. And a lot of times it just signals that you are where you are in your growth trajectory. Not that there's anything wrong with where you are, just know where you are.
Just know where you are.
A lot of the podcasts I'm listening to, a lot of the content I'm taking in, like there's this framework for understanding growth and development that's called spiral dynamics. It came around in the mid 90s. Yeah, but it's based on a lot of stuff that was put forth in the mid 70s. It's based on stuff that was put forth in the mid 50s, and so it really does, it like boils down some really, really huge complex ideas into simple vocabulary of colors. I don't really want to introduce it because, like I said, there's like, it's coming back and a lot of people are introducing it with whole podcasts. So I'll put those podcasts in the show notes if you want to learn more about the different colors and spiral dynamics. Plus we talk about chakra colors and they don't really line up, so it could get really confusing.
It does.
But what it does is it shows, it's kind of like the Enneagram. Every single one shows health and unhealth. Like there's a healthy way to be this color and there's an unhealthy way to be this color. And there's a natural progression in human history. There's a natural progression in the life of a society or a country. There's a natural progression in an individual person through these colors. And it's spiral dynamics because you start to find that some of the later ones are just map around as like more evolved versions of the earlier ones. But one of the underlying takeaways I get from processing my experience through the lens of spiral dynamics is that you want to meet them in whatever color, whatever stage of their growth trajectory they're in, and continue to remind yourself that being that color, being in that stage, is what they have decided for themselves, consciously or unconsciously, best serves them at this point. And so if I look at where they are and I imagine where I would like them to be, then I have to deal with that tension internally, not on them. I'm not trying to pull them out of where they are into another place I think they should be. I'm instead dealing with myself and saying, this is where they are. That's just where they are.
You're meeting them where they are.
Maybe I can look at a time when I was there too. And maybe I can draw that connection because the fact that they're there reminds me of who I was when I was there. And I judge that part of me, so then I therefore judge them. Right? And so I can take all that off the plate and just meet them where they are. And the thing that makes that especially cool is that then when I look at the parts of me that I have exiled, that I have judged, that I have rejected, I can figure out what color of the spiral that they're on and have just as much compassion for those parts of me. And so if you are in a situation where you're not using your voice, there are all kinds of tools you can use to locate where you are on your growth trajectory. The spiral dynamics being a really, really potent one. And then built into the nature of investigating where you are on that growth curve is an urge to meet yourself there. I don't want anyone to hear, if you're not using your voice, you should be. Correct. I don't want anyone to hear there's something wrong with it if you're not using your voice. What I do want people to hear is know why and understand that it is a choice. And just get introspective about the whys, and then you can tease those out between the ones that don't serve you and the ones that do.
And if you're not using your voice, starting to identify how you feel about that. Not that you have to fix it or change it right now, but recognizing and not using your voice, how does it make you feel?
Yes. And then if you feel like you are ready to move into the next stage of growth where you do use your voice more often, here are some tools.
Yes.
There's a parable that I read that I'm going to read here. I just encountered this and it's really neat. It's an ancient Chinese text from about the 3rd century BCE, I think. It's about a guy named Mr. Ho, or he, or ha. I don't know how to pronounce the vowel. I'm just going to say that right now. But here it goes like this. Once a man of Chu named Mr. Ho, having found a piece of jade matrix in the Chu mountains, took it to court and presented it to King Li. King Li instructed the jeweler to examine it, and the jeweler reported it is only a stone. Because jade, when it's not cut, it just looks like a rock. Like it doesn't just look like jade. Like you have to cut into it to see the jadiness. The king, supposing that Ho was trying to deceive him, ordered that his left foot be cut off in punishment. In the time of King Li passed away, and King Wu came into the throne, and Ho once more took his matrix and presented it to King Wu. King Wu ordered his jeweler to examine it, and again the jeweler reported it's only a stone. The king, supposing that Ho was trying to deceive him as well, ordered that his right foot be cut off. Ho, clasping the matrix to his breast, went to the foot of the Chu mountains where he found it and wept for 3 days and nights, and then when all of his tears were cried out, he wept blood in their place. The king, hearing of this, sent someone to question him. He said, "Many people in the world have had their feet amputated. Why do you weep so piteously over it?" The man asked. He replied, "I do not grieve because my feet have been cut off. I grieve because a precious jewel is dubbed a mere stone, and a man of integrity is called a deceiver. This is why I weep." The king then ordered the jeweler to cut and polish the matrix himself, and then when he had done so, a precious jewel emerged. Accordingly, it was named the Jade of Mr. Ho. And I share that story because you are the only person who has the power to show people the inner beauty of the jade within you.
Yeah.
And it is a very real and valid pain that we feel when the world and the experts and the people in authority look at us and say, it is only a stone. Mm-hmm. But the animating energy behind your continual forward movement is to continue to remind yourself that despite what they see, there is a precious stone underneath. And using your voice is the way that you share that with the world. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you get both feet cut off before that happens. That doesn't mean it shouldn't happen.
Mm-hmm. We all have gifts. We have gifts to share with the world, and that's why we have a tribe of people. Those tribe of people are meant to use those gifts that you have to give and get something out of those gifts and be changed by the gifts that you have. And we will only know those by you using your voice. And, every time I start to doubt myself and the things I've said on this podcast and using my voice, that's when another review shows up telling us how much we've impacted their life, or it's made them think about things or change their trajectory. And it's just validation to keep going. You will have naysayers. There's going to be push against, but that's the neat thing about humanity is not everyone's on the same journey. So the people that are pushing back are not the people that are meant to learn from you.
Right. And if you're supposed to move to a place where you're using your voice freely in this life, that's going to happen right when it's supposed to happen. It's more like when you're on the freeway just looking for the signs for the right on-ramp to get where you're going. And if you're still not at a place where you feel safe using your voice or confident using your voice, that just means that your off-ramp hasn't come yet. But still move forward.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Still move forward. I like how you said your forward movement. Mm-hmm.
That's what gets you to the on-ramp, even if it's nowhere in sight.
Right.
Off-ramp, on-ramp, I'm being really confusing.
Well, and it may take more than this lifetime. The point is not it's in the journey, right? The learning is in the journey. It's in this practicing over and over and over. And it may take us a while to master it, and we might not master it in this lifetime, but it's that moving forward piece, the keep practicing. So on that note, what are you grateful for?
I am grateful for, I actually attended a virtual retreat last weekend. And we made it, it's like the 7th one that this group has done, and it was the first time they did it virtually because of the Rona. But it's interesting because I don't think I would have gone had it been in person because it's out of state. And so, I coordinated with my wife, and it's I don't know that it has a name. Wait, are you saying that's the name of the retreat?
No, I'm just saying it's a silver lining.
Yes.
One of those things, like when you're like talking about things to be grateful for about Corona, it's like you're exposed to something you would not have been exposed to.
Yes.
Had it not gone online. Anyway, didn't mean to interrupt.
Right. And so, but it was I grew up in a church, and we would go to church camp and be gone for a while, and we'd come back a completely different person. And you're just like everything made sense, and you're so like you've evolved, and then a couple of weeks later you get really depressed because it didn't last. You're just back to normal. And
Yeah.
and so I've gone through that enough times to not like try to make this into a big transformative thing. But I did take some pretty solid lessons. I got some pretty solid reminders, and I'm still really, really processing a lot of the stuff that I took away from it. But I'm really grateful that I went. And specifically, awesome. I'm grateful for my friend Todd, who is the only reason that I went, because they kept asking me if I was going to go. And on the first night, what we had to do was to figure out why we were there and figure out our why, so that at the end we could kind of assess if we got what we came for. And my one reason was I'm here because Todd asked me to come here. But then I found a better one, and it definitely helped. And so yeah, I'm still chewing on a lot of the stuff. But I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for the weekend. I'm grateful for him, and I'm grateful for the guys I met. And I'm really looking forward to how that contributes to my own growth.
Yeah, I'm grateful that you chose you. That you took the time to work on your own growth.
There was a lot of guilt. I do not like asking. Oh man, I just made it really personal. I don't like asking my wife to do more than she's already doing. And so she took the toddler all of the second half of Friday, all of Saturday, and the first half of Sunday. And I felt a lot of guilt around that at first, and that was something I had to work through. But I made the ask anyway.
Roll that into gratitude. Then you're definitely grateful for her that she values your growth enough to say, "Hey, I got this. This is one weekend."
I did sneak a little thank you note into her dashboard on her car.
See, that's awesome. That's awesome.
So yeah, it was a little bit of emotional heavy lift just to get to a place where I was able to do this retreat. But I'm grateful for it, for her, and for all of it.
Good.
What about you?
I will try to get through this without crying, but oh gosh, it's already started. My sister Sarah, my beautiful sister, I'm not grateful for her today. No, I am, but I'm not, that's not where I'm going. We have the same mom and different dads. Not a lot of people know that. And, her dad is a wonderful, kind and caring man. And, he, battled colon cancer, recently and kind of was in the clear, and now it's back and untreatable. So he was given a short life expectancy outcome the other day. And so again, we're facing another potential loss in our family, and she is devastated. She's incredibly close to her dad. And so I'm trying to stay in an elevated frequency to love and support her as she kind of deals with this really hard and struggling time for her. And so I'm just using gratitude in this case to kind of help me cope with the hurt I'm bearing for her. And I'm incredibly grateful for him because he has been a wonderful dad to her and has helped her become this beautiful human that she is, and just in modeling that for her. He's one of those men of few words. He doesn't say much, but when he says something, you listen. And she's the one that kind of does all the talking, and she's kind of the outgoing one. And he's always like me, this back fly on the wall that sort of sits and takes her in. But he has had such a huge influence on her and has helped her just become this beautiful human. And I am so grateful for that, because she changes the world and he's part of her foundation. And then not only that, but he was stepdad to my brother and I for many years. And that's a choice he had to make, and he chose to treat us just like her, no different than his own kid, and has always been kind to us, my brother and I, and was such a great father figure for us as well. And so I'm incredibly grateful for his legacy in her life, in my life, and my brother's, and he will be truly missed. But we're fighting. So that's mine today.
I am so grateful that you keep showing up. You have so many legit reasons to bow out for a while, and you keep showing up.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that one of these days.
God.
Okay.
Thank you for sharing that. I know that was hard.
Mm-hmm. I am also trying to be a model of what gratitude looks like when times get really hard. And it's not easy, but there's still beautiful things to see. And so it's one reason I'm choosing to kind of be vulnerable and share that, because I think it's important for people to know it's not always sunshine and roses. So.
Right. Well, you are a gratitude warrior.
I am. Yes.
And what is it? The saying goes, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war.
Oh.
Like you've had all these tools. We've talked about all these tools, mm-hmm. and you're on the front lines, and I just see you using them. And
Absolutely.
It's hard and it's a struggle, but you're doing it. So I commend you and honor you for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Until next time, everybody.
Yep.
Thank you for loving me. Thank you for being there.
Bye. We are grateful for you. Thank you for listening. And if you like what we're doing and you want more, then you can join our tribe to interact with other like-minded individuals. You can go through our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/True North Podcast 11.
Is it Podcast 11 or is it True North 11?
Oh, shit.
It's in our show notes. If you want more than that, you want some more hands-on healing stuff that we do, I do actual energy healing and body work, and Abby does life coaching and workshops. And you can find the URLs in our show notes when we figure out what they are.
Mm-hmm. And we are always trying to increase our reach and bring more people to find their true north. So we would really appreciate it if you could leave a review and rate it in whatever podcast platform you use.
Done. That's perfect.
What about the gratitude?
Oh, this one. Hang on. And one last thing. What are you grateful for? There. I said it. I said the thing.